Hey, Matt.
Hey, Bob. What's going on?
Not too much. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright. This is The Wright Show, available on both streaming video and via audio podcast. You are Matthew Yglesias, unless I'm mistaken. You are, you're the author of 1 Billion Americans. Am I right?
I am. And the slow, boring newsletter. And
which is going to be the main subject of discussion.
Right.
If people want to know about your book, they can go locate a conversation you and I had about it, or they can go to Extreme Measures and actually buy the book. But what we're gonna talk about today is the amazing world of Substack. You've made a big splash with a new newsletter called enticingly, sexily, slow boring.
Yeah.
And you may not know about this, but I actually just went paid on the Substack platform. I had for a long time had an unpaid newsletter called the Nonzero newsletter. Now we have a paid edition that will, unlike the unpaid version, come out multiple times a week. So I'm eager to gain insights from you about how I turn this into a smashing success. I also want to talk about, the question of whether Substack can save the world from tribalism.
Probably not.
You think maybe not?
No.
Well, I guess we've settled that one. So let's just focus on strategy. Let's just focus on the business model. How's it going for you there at Substack?
Very well. I've got a lot of subscribers, more than I thought I could get. I spent months wringing my hands about whether or not I should do this, and cajoling them into making me an offer that would minimize my downside risk, and that wound up being unfavorable for me relative to just sort of taking the defaults, because a lot of people signed up as subscribers, and I've been really excited about that.
So wait, was this like the book advance model? It sounds like maybe it wasn't. Like where they give you an advance against future earnings, or what?
Well, so they gave me a guaranteed payment in exchange for me accepting a lower share of the subscription revenue for 1 year.
Oh.
So that I could say to my wife and my 5-year-old, like, we are definitely not going to end up homeless as a result of this. But it limited, which was great. I mean, I
see the appeal of that.
To be 100% fair, right? Because I was nervous about the whole thing. I wanted to do it personally. I thought it would be more interesting work, but I was nervous about the business model. So they gave me a deal that eliminated my downside risk, but reduced my sort of share of the financial upside for 1 year. But it's gone really well. And, in year 2, I'll be making more money than before. And some people like Andrew Sullivan, Glenn Greenwald, I think, are doing even better than I was. It's a lot of us, old time blog people. I mean, you're you've got the Blogging Heads brand.
Yeah, I was never a blog person myself, but I know the
blogs used to be a big thing. And, I think, that to me is like what was substantively appealing about the Substack model is that it is more similar to that kind of work that I did as a blogger, but this time with a way to make money, which was always the Achilles heel of the blogosphere.
So you're going to be fabulously wealthy within a couple of years. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I would not say fabulously wealthy, but if this number of people keep subscribing, I'll be doing very well, better than anyone has any right to expect for writing about politics on the internet.
Especially with a newsletter called Slow Boring.
Oh, it's great branding. It's Max Weber.
What did Max Weber say?
He said politics is the strong and slow boring of hard boards.
Okay. Well, now I have to okay, you're back. Yeah. There was a video glitch, but you're back. Do we know if that's because, is this the time of day when all the youngsters download porn in your neighborhood or something?
I hope that's not it. I honestly have no idea.
Okay. So anyway, you're back. So, the blog model is an interesting one. Because I wonder how many similarities there are. One thing I haven't seen a lot of is and the Substack people talk about this as something you can do, but I haven't seen a lot of strong reciprocal relationships develop. In the old blog days, you would link to Ezra Klein, he would link to you. Mickey Kaus would link to Josh Marshall would link to Mickey, and they helped each other get off the ground and get critical mass. Mm-hmm. I have not seen as much of that. Is that happening?
A little bit. I think I've had a fair amount of link back with Noah Smith, who I like a lot, hoping to try to help out Will Wilkinson as he launches a new thing there. I agree. There's less of the back and forth from the blog days, in part because one thing that I just have learned as a writer is that you need your articles to be comprehensible to your audience. Otherwise that doesn't, work. And unfortunately, asking people to go read something else first before they understand what you're saying is just challenging, mm-hmm. Like it's hard as a writing thing, even if you kind of want to do it. And I also do think that podcasts have become, or, video chats like this have become a really good way for people who find each other interesting to sort of make content that is dialogue-y in nature, right? So Dave Roberts is a longtime friend of mine, a great writer. He's
the
also
grist, the grist guy.
Yeah, he was a grist guy. He's on Substack now. I have not done cross-linking with his newsletter Volts, but we did an audio thing together that we both posted to our respective Substacks, right? Mm-hmm. So both of our subscribers could hear it, and that's sort of introduced people to each other. It's just like a literal dialogue, and
right.
Well, you remember more than I, but when you first started doing Blogging Heads and I would come on, it was obviously technically possible to do it, but it has gotten
barely. I must say.
No, that's what I mean.
It took a lot of work.
It was really hard, and now it has gotten so much easier to record two people talking to each other if you want to do that, right? So we've seen a kind of a scaling up of that, particularly in pure audio. And now, thanks to the pandemic, everyone is getting more comfortable with these video type tools. So you were way ahead of the curve on that kind of thing because you were pushing at the very bleeding edge of what could actually be done.
Well, I don't know if you remember how we used to do it.
You would have to synchronize QuickTime videos.
Well,
right?
But not only that. You couldn't see each other because you couldn't count on people having broadband. What you had, we would have a phone conversation while each of us was doing a local video recording. Then we would upload those to the server and synchronize them. But it was a whole different game.
Yeah, so it was a mess. Whereas now, anyone, if you want to make a little recording of two people jib-jabbing at each other, you have to buy the premium Zoom subscription, but it's not beyond the technical capacity of at least anyone who can write on the internet can make a video recording now. So, I think that particular kind of chit-chat dynamic that we used to have in blogs has moved there, and also to Twitter, where, of course, all we do is yell at each other.
I've noticed that. And I do want to eventually get around to this question of whether Substack can make the world of discourse at least somewhat less vitriolic than Twitter has made it. But first, as far as the business stuff, well, let me ask you first, is it a frustration for you ever that your readership, although very devoted, is more limited in size? You were at Vox, you were a co-founder of Vox. And it was possible for a piece to go, do very well and get, I'm sure, 100,000, 200,000 viewers. That is not going to happen with bonus content. Now, you can, at any given time, choose to do an issue of newsletters out in the open, and we're doing a little bit of both, although it's mainly paid. But are you finding that frustrating when you think hey, that was a really good piece? It's a shame that so few people know.
Well, so, I do usually one free piece per week and 4 paid pieces. And best practices, according to the Substack people, and has been my experience, is try to make your best thing free. even though it kind of sounds weird, but it's like the paid stuff is for the super fans, like the people who really want to know what you have to say about slightly weird things. You think there's something really good, you make it free, and so that works well. The problem is when you realize in retrospect that you maybe misjudged it. And you put something out and you hear like a really strong positive response from your subscribers. And it's like, oh man, maybe I should have made that one the free one. But I mean, I do think it's important to address a broad audience of people. I mean, that's one reason I'm still doing the Weeds podcast for Vox, which has a much larger audience than my subscriber base. I've been writing a column bi-weekly for Bloomberg, which is interesting because they not only have a big audience, but it's different from the Vox audience. And like I get the people who email me about how terrible I am from Bloomberg columns have like very different takes on why I'm terrible than my usual audience, which is good, right? I mean, that's because breadth of reach is important, but also you want to get like different kinds of people, going from 15,000 kind of center left liberals to 100,000 is actually less interesting than reaching an audience that's center right. Or someday, hardcore communists or we'll get there. I think as far as Bloomberg, I think the Bloomberg opinion stuff goes to everyone who rents one of those Bloomberg terminals, right? And so that stuff mainly is feedback from the right, I assume. From finance bros who think
good to know. Good to know. If the Substack thing doesn't work out, it's good to know a few of those people, but it's a different clientele.
But then, so then the other thing, in terms of scale, right, for me at least, is that Twitter is out there. I have a very well followed Twitter account, a few 100,000 people. I think I read in Axios, someone did like a content analysis of who Biden transition people follow on Twitter. I was like the fourth most followed person there. Yeah. So like, that's good. Like, you want to have, like, as a writer, you would like people to pay attention to what you're saying. I make no warrant that they actually care what I think, but, like, that's good. That's really good to know. And so to me, there's a portfolio of platforms that I participate in and they all have their different pros and cons, and the Substack has some really strong pros as a way to really deliver something that, like, the biggest fans really enjoy and focus on really serving that audience well in a way that is satisfying and remunerative, but also like actually enjoyable. Like I have such a spring in my step, like doing writing that is not focused on search engine optimization and how is this going to look in the Facebook feed and stuff like that, but is really focused in on, like people who share my sensibility and interests, like do they care about this? Like, will this be good? Will this be interesting to them? Is like a fun kind of work to do. And then, there's other stuff, and I'm here on your show, and, I think a lot of people watch this, and there's lots of great ways to communicate with people.
So it's liberating, having a distinct audience that loves you.
That knows where you're coming from, like one of the great things about blogs was the sense that, the people who read your blog on Wednesday would probably read it again on Thursday and Friday, and they understand where you're coming from. And you hope to attract an audience of people who may disagree with you about things, but respect you, right? And then on the algorithmic internet that developed, you're writing for an audience of strangers, and you have to, as a writer, you have to respect that. That these things are going to be read by people who have no idea who you are, what other things you've written, what anything is. And while I was working at Slate for a few years, this really turned, when it was a big change at Slate, which is a very writerly publication that at least historically was known for being like kind of wacky, putting things that were a little bit out there. And the idea, in its inception was very similar to a traditional magazine, that it was like, you write an issue of Slate for Slate readers who were assumed to like get it, quote unquote. But it became a time when once all publications are writing for an audience of whoever is clicking around on Facebook, whatever pops up on a Google News feed, you have to frame things in a certain kind of way. And I find that to be very tedious and burdensome. To write defensively against misunderstandings rather than to try to like get to the point.
No, you're right. So we've kind of come full circle in a way with Substack because you mentioned Slate. I was writing for Slate before you were. And the reason is because I was at the New Republic when Mike Kinsley was editor. Then he found in Slate. And like at the New Republic, as at kind of early Slate, more at the News Republic because that was just a physical publication, 100,000 people subscribed. They understood all your jokes. There was a huge set of assumptions that you knew were shared between you and your readers. Early Slate was kind of like that, although obviously if anybody can get there from any point in the internet, you're starting to move toward an audience that's less familiar with your stuff. But you're right. Then once, both because of the importance of search and because of the importance of social media, I think, in steering people to things, it became a totally different world where anything you write is likely to be misunderstood by a large number of people should you find a large audience. I think this still haunts people on Twitter. And in fact, this could become a masterful segue to cancel culture because on Twitter, people often write as if everyone gets their jokes. And yet Twitter holds the potential to bring you to a lot of people who manifestly will not. The most recent casualty is Will Wilkinson, who did a tweet that I think was funny. It had a clear point. He didn't really want to lynch Mike Pence, but as a result, he lost his job at a think tank for which I thought was a little bit of an overreaction. So anyway, Will is now spending more time on Substack, and Substack has gotten a reputation recently, and I think to some extent they like this, as a refuge for the canceled or cancelable. And you are sometimes held up as an example of that. You didn't get fired or anything, but you tell me if this is true or not. I mean, first of all, you signed the Harper's letter, which I thought was good. I mean, the main thing I didn't like about the Harper's letter is that more progressives didn't sign it. But then, you got a little blowback about that from a Vox writer who was offended by some of the other people who did sign it, not by you per se. Anyway, the perception is that you left Vox as it had become more woke than you were comfortable with. And so Substack was a natural home. Now, how much of that perception is valid?
I would put it a little bit differently. And I even, would put it differently now from just how I characterized it a few months ago. But looking at people sometimes get fired for bad tweets or something like that. But I think much more common than that is if you are affiliated with an institution, then everything that you say on Twitter reflects on that institution. And if a lot of people follow you on Twitter, that has even more of a reflection on the institution. And if you have your name on the masthead as I was a co-founder of this website, that ratchets up even more. So there was just a lot of interest among management at Vox.com and at Vox Media in what was I tweeting and what was the public perception of what I was tweeting. And they, for completely valid reasons, wanted me to tweet as a good corporate citizen, who was just like you would think. If I'm thinking about myself in management, right? If I was managing a large enterprise, would I want somebody with 500,000 Twitter followers just like firing off 100 times a day, different jokes, hot takes on issues he doesn't cover? Like, no, like I would want Yglesias to reel it in. But like, I didn't want to do that. And a good thing about being an independent operator, a small business owner, et cetera, is like, I could just do what I want. People can be mad or not mad. I can apologize or not apologize. And it's up to me. And it's not about woke culture or any particular line of disagreement. It's actually just about the structural situation. So Megan McArdle was on Twitter today, ironically, saying that she thinks the New York Times and the Washington Post, where she works, shouldn't let their writers tweet at all. And I think she has some good reasons for that. Mm-hmm. Like, I think at least in a dream world, Dean Baquet would probably appreciate it if all of his staff got off Twitter. But I think a lot of New York Times writers would be sad if they tried to make that rule, which is one reason why they don't do it. And so I like, for all the reasons that people for decades have enjoyed being their own boss, I like it too, because I don't know. I think my Twitter feed is good. And a lot of people like it, but like it gets people upset because I talk about controversial topics.
Yeah. And I think you're good at being, playfully trollish. Would you say you're not like a hardcore troll, but you did what was it? A tweet recently. This is totally playful, but where you complained about the disproportionate affection for hiking among tech people.
Yeah,
you're kind of joking. You're raising a question. There's an answer, by the way. Do you know the whole Earth review? The whole origins of tech libertarianism among granola types. Yeah. It goes way back. But anyway, you would concede that you're good at. You're not a troll, but you know what I mean.
Yes. I like it. I enjoy that kind of give and take. But I also totally get that like a media brand might not want that because, as you were saying, right, a cool thing about the old New Republic, or any, comparable circulation periodical in that era is that they could all be a little weird. Mm-hmm. They had an audience. The audience paid them money. The audience was fairly loyal. And so you were trying to be, playful or eccentric or whatever. Social media is very flattening. And different things get, I forget what it's called, but things get completely decontextualized, and you get screenshotted and passed around and around and around, so I don't know the full story of Will's situation up there, but you see it all the time, right? Like jokes, to be funny, sometimes get edgy. They go too far. You watch any stand-up routine that's good, and there's always something in there where you're like, I can't believe he said that, right? Yeah.
But that's if you understand the joke. There's a larger danger on Twitter that they don't even understand it's a joke.
Or just that it's done maliciously.
Yeah.
Like a lot of what happens on Twitter. So one thing that I remember is that I was trying to say, this was like a year ago. I was trying to say that some things that are done in the name of like social justice practice that heavily focus on what words people use for things, like the push to use people first language.
Wait, what is people first language?
So people first language is like people experiencing homelessness instead of homeless
as opposed to homelessness is a social problem.
Well, no, as opposed to calling them homeless people. Right.
Because they're not fundamentally marked. Their character is not defined by that status.
It's not that there's a special kind of person who is homeless. Right. It's that they're people and they don't have a home. So it totally makes sense. Like I get it. Right.
Yeah.
What that all means. But what I wanted to say was that, these kind of things are stuff that college educated people and people who like work in journalism like are just good at doing. right? Like I'm good at picking up new terminology and how it's supposed to be employed,
right,
and understanding its logic,
and I'm not
assimilating myself to new norms. And a lot of the people who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of these kinds of things, right? You know, working class people of color, people with disabilities of various kinds, are actually not as good at this kind of stuff as relatively privileged yuppies are, right? Anyway, so I was saying something about this on Twitter, and then, you know, people who, it's not that like what I wrote was unclear or was misinterpreted, but people who just don't like me because of long-standing political disagreements and internet beefs would do a thing where you can take one tweet out of a multi-tweet thread and be like, look at this asshole saying that people who haven't gone to college are too stupid to understand words or something. You know, and that just goes on all the time on social media, right? People deliberately misrepresenting what other people they have beef with are saying.
Well, it's worse than that. It is reinforced. There are rewards for misrepresenting people. I mean, it's just kind of amazing the extent to which bad behavior is a good business model on social media. It really, really is. And I'm not saying anything original to suggest that has something to do with the infamous political polarization today, but it's so much bad faith is rewarded on Twitter.
Right. And, you know, and you are very strongly incentivized to engage with other people with maximal lack of generosity to what they are saying, right? To see I don't fully agree with this guy, but he's making an intriguing point, and it's causing me to possibly rethink some of my premises button out there, right? But there is a like quote tweet and be like, fuck this asshole, you know, function, right? Like it doesn't just like incentivize a certain kind of bad engagement. It just like literally allows you to retweet, right? Like you can just like fully echo, or you can fight, but you can't really engage, you know, in the way that if you ask anyone, it's like, how do you learn about the world? How do you become smarter, right? It's like you have to read strong writers, and you have to think about what they're saying. And if it seems wrong to you, you have to think about, well, why would somebody think that? Like, am I understanding this correctly? Do I really understand what this essay is saying? Right. And social media is just antithetical to that. Like you get plaudits by finding an oddly phrased paragraph, screenshotting it, putting a very ungenerous spin on it, and being like, this shows that people from the other group are terrible. And then everyone from your group is like, yes, retweet. They are terrible.
I should say there was, even before the internet, an era I recall, an incentive to be disingenuous. Sometimes you could, you know, there's a reason that straw man arguments, that there's a term for those, and long has been. But it's true that the kind of immediate feedback you get for that kind of dishonesty is much stronger now. Now, what about the possibility of that Substack will help create a better world? I heard an interview with Chris Best, one of the co-founders of Substack, whom I once had a Zoom call with. He's a nice guy. He was being interviewed by Kara Swisher, and he was kind of making the case that newsletters are just much less susceptible to, I guess, the pathologies of a share-based model. Maybe that's not the way he put it, but I was kind of wondering how true that is. Because, I mean, for starters, the people who have the most immediate success with newsletters are people who built up big followings on Twitter. So whatever incentives there are that the following of which leads one to have a big following on Twitter are, you know, they will say something about the kinds of people who wind up with big Substack followings. But it's also true that you still are going to use social media to get your Substack stuff out, right? That's part of your strategy with the free content you're doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the improvement that Substack offers is that you are not dependent on Facebook and Google in the same kind of way for that really, really, really big reach. But you are definitely not detached from the Twitter universe. You can be more substantive than you could be on Twitter. You can produce work that is better than the work that would be literally produced on Twitter. But there's a very important symbiosis, I think, between not literally every successful Substack presence, but most of them. I mean, the main way that people that I think Substack works is it's a kind of extension of Twitter presences for people. The other thing about Substack, right? I mean, one reason that I'm glad that the Bloomberg audience is different from audiences I've written for in the past is that my biggest concern about writing for, a subscriber base is that you become hostage to that exact same group of people, right? And only getting feedback from people who've already opted in to liking you, right? Which is different from the ways in which social media can be pathological, but not necessarily optimal, right? I always want to be hearing from different kinds of people because I just think it's a good habit to run takes by a range of audiences and see what it is people are thinking, how they respond to. Because I'm often surprised by, what different people think about different things. It's not. I've been doing this a long time, but it's not 100% predictable what's going to be out there until you see people. And that's something I saw promoting my book too, which was that. It got some reactions that I wasn't anticipating from some directions, which, was informative to me. And I wouldn't ever want to be somebody who just writes for the 9,000 or so paid subscribers that I have, because, that would get just super predictable.
So let's get down to some basic tips for Substack novices. So take me as an example. So I have this newsletter, Nonzero newsletter. I mean, I'm a little unusual in that it has actually a fairly big non-paying subscriber base because I've been at it for a couple of years, 19,000 people or something. But I had gotten lazy about it. It was only coming out once a month. And what I'm going to do is there's still going to be a free version coming out at least once a month, but I'm doing the paid version multiple times a week. It's still called the Nonzero newsletter. I have already defined a kind of theme, broadly speaking, for it. The phrase is the Apocalypse Aversion Project. So it covers everything from solving global problems through global governance to attacking the impediments to constructive concerted action like polarization, the psychology of tribalism, blah, blah, blah. So I have a theme. But I'm honestly a little, I've put out one issue that's paid. I actually enjoyed the experience of even though I have not nearly as many subscribers as you had. I enjoyed the experience of thinking as Sally Field put it at the Academy Awards, you like me, you really like me, however many or few of they may be who fit that description right now. Well, I could tell you the one subsequent thing I've done as a promotional effort, but first, why don't you tell me what you would do? And and I got to say, I just can't be as prolific as you. Okay, you're like the world's most prolific person.
But so the advice I was given when I launched my site that I think worked well for me is to say to the world, "Hey, here's the thing, right? It's going to be a subscription newsletter that comes out X times a week, but it's going to be free for the next X number of issues so that everybody gets a chance to see." So you say right now, you can start paying now at a discounted price, but 6 weeks from now, everything,
I missed that boat.
Yeah, but you can reverse yourself on it. But so you give it away for free for a while so that people can start reading it. Yeah. And you say to them, if you are liking this, you should start paying now while it's at the discounted price, rather than actually hitting the paywall. And to this day, I mean, I've gotten subscribers since that introductory period. But it's still true that about 50% of my current subscribers are people who started paying while everything was free. Just because they were reading it. They liked it. And, each issue I'd be like, hey, you should sign up. We got the discount still coming. And then eventually, you put the paywall down. So you do some paid, some free. You try to make your most accessible or most buzzy stuff free so that you're out there and people are talking about it. And then, that's how you go. I mean, then, you promote anything the same way, kind of hassle people, link to this, here you go. So, because the paradox, right, is that to get subscribers, people need to read it. But if you have to subscribe to read, then you have a problem, right? Right. And there's no equivalent exactly of newsstand sales, of like, you're at the airport, you got a flight going, so you pick up an issue of The Economist. And then once you realize you've done that X times in your life, you think, maybe I should subscribe to this. Right.
Right.
And that's sort of the dynamic that you've got to get going is you need a big group of people to like sometimes read your free issues and be like, oh yeah, no, like these are good. I do enjoy each of them. I find myself clicking on links that go to other ones and being, man, I wish I could read that. Like, I ought to go pay up.
Yeah.
What I think you have that's good that I sort of lack is like a clear sense of mission and purpose, because I don't think that subscribing to these newsletters makes a ton of sense as like a purely rational value calculus. It's a little bit the equivalent of like buying the merch at a concert for a band you like. Like you get the shirt, you wear the shirt, you enjoy it, you get some value out of it, but as a like textile acquisition proposition, like it doesn't really make sense. You know what I mean? It's just something you do because you want to affiliate with the thing. And so having a sense that like, well, there's a mission here, right? By subscribing, I'm helping to avert the apocalypse. Like that helps. That's a good idea.
That's the pitch. Who doesn't like that?
Right. I mean, who doesn't want to avert the apocalypse?
Well, people who welcome the apocalypse, but they welcome a different kind of apocalypse. Like this is what I wrote about in the first issue. The QAnon people welcome the apocalypse. It's just that they're different. They're not, their definition of the apocalypse is everything will be made right. And that is the notion in the original Christian apocalypse, of course. It's just that in the Christian apocalypse, there is, in the meanwhile, global catastrophe. And so that's what the term has come to mean. And that's the one we're trying to avert. Now, Matt, okay, you're back. I was going to point out that you had disappeared. You're still kind of freezing up intermittently, but your expression changes often enough so that there will be variety for those of us who are watching. Anyway,
yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening with this video.
It's mainly an audio podcast audience. Good. So we're fine. So yeah, it's true that, you're, what you are, I mean, your unifying theme is you are a policy nerd. And I think it's heartening that there are as many people as there are, that your audience is as big as it is. Because that's the unifying theme, right? Is like, you're interested, it's mainly domestic policy. And, I think during our last conversation, I gave you my sermon about how you should do more foreign policy, but it went largely unheeded, I think.
I was starting to dabble a little bit back.
Well, I noticed, and then you got blowback from the blob, and you just got to fight through that. I saw that on Twitter.
The blob,
you got to fight through that.
The blob. I'm also a little bit waiting for something to happen on foreign policy, which just hadn't been the case initially. I think today, right? We had Biden-Putin call. I'm not caught up on.
I missed that.
I'm not fully caught up on what happened there. But this seems like the first. Actual foreign policy substance starting to occur. I don't know what your read on this is exactly, but I mean, this is my going back to the primary, like by far my biggest concern about Joe Biden is that he is going to implement a worse foreign policy approach than Barack Obama, which itself was flawed. That Biden is going to try to like rebuild the unipolar moment in a totally unworkable way.
I don't think they're quite that naive. I do think they have decided that a big unifying theme for their foreign policy can be opposing authoritarianism, which is a perfectly valid thing, kind of value-wise, looks good on paper. I think as a practical matter, it can get you into trouble, like, for example, a long Cold War that prevents us from making progress on important global issues. And that's assuming it doesn't get you into a hot war with China. They're big. They have not let go of the kind of neocon emphasis on imposing American, values on the world. I mean, for example, Blinken has said they're sticking with the sanctions in Venezuela, which to my mind make no sense at all. I would love to change Venezuela's form of government, but history suggests that all sanctions generally do is make human beings more miserable, and that's what's happening in Venezuela. So I think, the short way of saying it is this is not going to be a very realist administration, even in the progressive realist sense that I have championed and I think you have some sympathy for.
Well, and especially in the China context, right, where they are a quite bad human rights actor domestically. And I think, you want to be able to, at least like as a human being, you want to be able to articulate that and not have government officials who are totally like full of shit. But there's just also an international, there's like a bilateral relationship with China that involves both the need to cooperate on certain things and also a need to like not let them conquer Vietnam. Right. And if you adopt a worldview that delegitimizes the regime per se, then you can't effectively draw lines. Like you want to be able to say, we should cooperate like this. You should really not do that or we're going to be mad. Right. And if the line, I mean, this was always the problem going back to Bush post 9/11 is that if you say that it's just per se illegitimate to be the People's Republic of China, even though I sympathize with that, but like it doesn't work. It then means that you can't articulate meaningful consequences for bad behavior or a framework for cooperation. We are taking ourselves out of the game of having diplomacy because, like, I don't know, like they shouldn't be dictators, I guess, but like they are, and and like they're not going to stop being dictators because the American president
well not only that
says they shouldn't be.
It's worse than that, to the extent that we try to delegitimize what is a fairly popular leadership actually in China. We will only make it more popular. And, it's kind of like what the resistance did for Trump sometimes, did him the favor of attacking him, and that reinforced the allegiance of his base. You got a little bit of that dynamic. I certainly think China's a tough case because the Uyghur thing is one of the most, to the extent that we can make out what has been happening, it sounds like one of the most egregious things going on anywhere human rights wise. I just think we have to, at a minimum, not make things worse, and increasing the allegiance of the Chinese people to the government, I think, only makes the government less susceptible to, kind of moral suasion, a little less concerned about their reputation in the world and so on. The other thing, just quickly, that kind of drives me nuts is this idea related to using authoritarianism as the unifying theme of your foreign policy. And I got to say, I was a big fan of Bernie, but there was a little bit of this in some of his foreign policy rhetoric. Anyway, the anti-authoritarianism. What he didn't espouse, which Biden seems intent on doing, is forming some kind of league of democracies, which I just think becomes it creates a de facto league of authoritarians in effect, and they start coordinating, and I just don't see any good coming from that.
Well, but I also just think, right, there's this, this is a Democrat thing, which is a torn desire to not be doing unilateralism like, which is bad, but also to be starting wars. Right. And so they want to come up with some kind of sleight of hand whereby they can be starting wars, but not doing the bad unilateralism. So
that's an even more cynical reading, I think, maybe than mine, which I would not have thought.
No, but like, I think I remember going back to, the mid-aughts and being at conferences with different people and, Anne-Marie Slaughter and Ivo Daalder and, smart people in this arena. They were really, really worried. They didn't want to articulate a multilateralism principle that would take humanitarian interventions off the table. Right. And so they recognized that, well, okay, if you follow the letter of international law, the Chinese and the Russians are never going to accept this government is doing human rights abuses as a legitimate means for a military intervention. And they didn't want to say, well, international law is important, so we're going to have to accept that, like, that's one of the consequences of following it. They wanted to create some alternate mechanism where they could say, well, it's both going to be, a world of liberty under law, I think was her phrase, something like that. A rule-based international order is what was in Obama's national security strategy, but then they don't actually want to follow the rules, right? So Republicans don't pretend that they care about the rules.
Right.
So it's more straightforward, right? That like a Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo foreign policy just straightforwardly doesn't make sense. And so like one day you're like best buddies with the Saudis and they're dismembering journalists. And the next day you're like, oh my God, the Iranians are so evil. Democrats like try to bring a higher order coherence to their ideas.
And yet,
but it infects them with this desire to like conjure up new institutions. It does. I just think like it ultimately doesn't deliver. On its premises, the idea of synthesizing realism with some system of governance works, but like it just like it has some unpleasant consequences that I think you and I believe you just have to learn to live with.
Yeah. No. I mean, as for the rule-based stuff, I mean, a big theme in my newsletter is the importance of nurturing international law, which I believe in firmly. And you're right that liberals have paid lip service to it. But you mentioned Anne-Marie Slaughter, and look, I know her, I like her, but she's a perfect example because before the Iraq War, she argued that, okay, granted, invasion without permission of the Security Council is illegal, but it's legitimate. Well, I mean, obviously, if you're allowed, whenever something is illegal, like imagine running America like that. Okay, it's illegal for me to break into my neighbor's home, but I have declared it legitimate. So it's okay? No, you can't. Either you take the idea of the law seriously, or you don't. And in that sense, the kinds of people who populate the Biden administration are, in a certain sense, I mean, I prefer them to the Trump foreign policy people, but the Biden people are probably more hypocritical on balance because they do pretend that they are sustaining a rule-based, law-based order, but they're completely selective in what rules they want to actually respect.
Right. And just like that's why I think it gets very fishy when people start talking about leagues of democracy and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Because, of course, they're not interested in what South Africa or India think about foreign policy issues. What they want to do, those are democracies, but they tend to put forward national security worldviews that are at odds with the American foreign policy establishment. They want to find some group of yes man countries.
Sure.
And then, like the Czechs and Australia, but then say that somehow they're following the law. And it's, I think in some ways it's worse actually than the overt transactionalism of the Trump era realists. Now, Bush was worse, right? Like Bush's version of not caring about international law, where he would like make up these sweeping principles and make like crazy declarations that terrify everybody. Like that was terrible. And I think everybody has been an improvement on that. But with Trump, you knew that nothing he said meant anything, you know, which I think is actually better than articulating bad principles. Because it's very, I don't think the people on Massachusetts Avenue take seriously how alarming the things they say can be to foreign leaders around the world, and how much American policy in the 21st century has really indicated that you ought to be secretly building a nuclear weapon right now because...
Oh, totally. I mean, look,
you know, I don't know. Like, I mean, I know you and I are of like minds on this. I have not been writing about this much, although I was just talking about it on Julie Galef's podcast yesterday. And like, it is crazy to me how little self-reflection there is among the American foreign policy community about like, if you were just a patriotic government official in some foreign country, like, what would you think about the behavior of the United States of America? And with Trump, I think it's like you would think, well, we should find a way to bribe this guy. You know, like, which is not the, honestly, like, as a step forward from like, will we make a disarmament deal with Gaddafi and then get him murdered anyway? Like, that's terrible. Like, I don't know. It's very frustrating.
We've totally screwed up the world's incentive structure. You let go of your nukes. We invade you. You keep them. We don't. Yeah. See, this is all the more reason you should be writing about foreign policy more and speaking about it more. America needs you. So what else before we go? Is there anything? I mean, you know, just a quick kind of analytical question. About, well, leave aside the Substack newsletter writer's business model, the Substack business model. I mean, they seem to be doing very well. They've, you know, they clearly have momentum. But how much is there in the way of what are called positive network externalities, which has been the key to rapid growth for like social media networks? In other words, technically that means the more people are on the network, the more valuable it is to be on the network. I think Substack is developing some of those and has more than it had when I first signed up with them like a year and a half ago or so. But what is your take on it as a platform in that regard?
This is the challenge for them, right? So Substack got started with the value proposition that they had good authoring tools and good subscription management tools. And it was an easy, low-lift way for somebody to get up and running with a quality subscription newsletter. And they 100% deliver on that promise, right? The problem now is that, okay, if you are, you know, like anything, there's a little bit of a power law, right? Where, you know, some people are very successful and then there's a long tail of middling letters. But if your newsletter is successful, right? If you're pulling in a substantial amount of revenue, then the things that Substack is best at become less valuable, right? Like with the amount of gross revenue that I'll be bringing in starting next fall, it would not be challenging for me to hire a developer to custom build stuff for me to get the basic functionality working. But Substack has started putting out stuff like the Substack Reader. You know, it's like almost like a reinvention of Google Reader, stuff like that. They have their lists and things like that. So, you know,
so it's like you can go to one place very easily that has all the newsletters you subscribe to and the access is more efficient. And if you also subscribe to one that's at MailChimp, well, that newsletter is out of luck. They're not going to be there. So that's an example of a network externality.
Right, exactly. And so if they can build more stuff that makes it better for readers to consume Substacks than other kinds of things, then that becomes a good reason for writers, to stay on it, right? And that would be the bull case for them, right? Right now, they lead the market. They have revenue. They have investment. They can hopefully build things like this reader tool, maybe build some other kinds of stuff that make it so that writers want to stay on the platform. I don't think that they are there, but I also don't think that they're done, working on it. But I think this is what you often see in the tech space, right? You have an early leader, and the problem is that what they are doing is good, but it can be copied. And so then it becomes a race, right? Does the leader extend their lead fast enough to stop people from just copying them? And that's like, business is hard. I'm a writer. I don't know if they could do it, but right. I mean, like, that was the thing. Like, for the longest time, I kept being a Facebook skeptic. I kept thinking like, this is never going to amount to anything. And obviously the thing that I was skeptical of really wouldn't have ever amounted to anything. Like, the reason Facebook is a successful company is that they kept doing new stuff. Like, they have a lot of smart people working there. And I don't love the product, but they kept changing it. They kept iterating it, making it better, making it more compelling. And like, that's why it succeeds. Or you think about Netflix, right? Which, like, I was a Netflix user when it was DVDs in the mail. Right. Yep. And like, the reason Netflix is a juggernaut today is not that, like, it's not that their DVDs in the mail were so much better than Blockbuster's DVDs in the mail. It was that, like, the people they hired kept building new and better stuff.
Well, they knew they wanted to move to where they are now from a very early stage.
Yeah, they're smart.
And Blockbuster had a legacy business to protect, which was doomed. But those two examples are very different. So Facebook has, extreme network externality. So I'm kind of surprised you were down on it. I mean, once a critical mass of people are there, it's just the place to be, right? For that kind of social media experience. That's where your friends are. And it's all the more valuable because that's where your friends are and that's where your potential friends are. Netflix at the other extreme, has very little in the way of network externalities. Substack is somewhere in between. I think, you're right. Recent innovations they've done, like the reader, increase the network externalities. I also think it would probably help if they had algorithms that, I don't know, either made it easier for readers who say, like, if they like my newsletter, made it easier for them to find other newsletters, because that then creates network externalities from the point of view of the readers, kind of. But also made it easier for newsletter proprietors to find newsletters they could have a naturally synergistic relationship with, if that makes sense. I mean, we talked about how you don't see the reciprocal linkage the way you did in the days of blogs. But I think they're thinking about all this stuff. They've been moving kind of methodically, but they have continued to progress.
Yeah, and, the big question, I think it's just like a little bit unknown and unknowable. Media people love to talk about things that are relevant to the media. So there've been these think pieces in New Yorker, Columbia Journalism Review, elsewhere. And, is Substack the future? I don't know, right? As a Substack author, I think I'm expected to have a strong opinion on this. Obviously, if the company does not roll out any new products or any new features over the next 18 months, like, they are not going to be the future. But like, I think it's obvious that they're aware of that fact, right? It's just a question of, like, can they execute on creating more synergy, making it so that you want to be a writer on a platform with other popular writers.
Right.
Because, otherwise what you have is an economy of scale thing, which is that you have, a centralized development team sort of making the authoring tools. So that's fine. But that's minimal, right? That doesn't keep growing your advantage unless you can make some really next level tools or something. Because there's lots of good CMSs out there. There's lots of ways to write.
I mean, there are also subtler network externalities. Like now there's enough writers on Substack that most people who would subscribe to any newsletter are familiar with the interface. They're familiar with the payment interface. Substack probably has their credit card information. That saves time. Those are little things, but they're not nothing.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. I mean, it's a start. It's a promising company. I just think it's a challenging road, but that's how business is.
It's a jungle out there. So I would say we've covered the waterfront. Well, actually we haven't, but we have been talking for an hour, and that's about what we do here. So we should say, first of all, again, your book is 1 Billion Americans, Case for Thinking Bigger. Is it bigger or big? It's bigger.
Bigger.
And your newsletter is slow, boring. It's great. I read it. My newsletter is Nonzero, one word. And people should, read everything we do and shower us, with money.
Thank you.
I think.
Yes, I agree.
So thanks, Matt, and, good luck with all. We'll check in with you down the road. Meanwhile, we do expect to see more foreign policy content from you.
Nice.
Okay. See you around.